Good afternoon. I'm Victoria Cobb, president of the Family Foundation. We are thrilled to have you maybe back with us this week. Maybe this is your first time joining us, but we're thrilled to have you for today's discussion. As some of you are aware, we've been having these weekly VIP chats, our opportunity to talk with somebody that's on the inside of Virginia politics, our chance to just work through some questions of the day that we're all having or that we think are sort of top of mind, and get someone's perspective on it that has an inside track and has just great expertise. So thanks for coming back. If you're joining us, this is our, I don't know, I guess we're on our fourth one, and we're just going to kind of continue these through what I call the lockdown, our governor having shut down our ability to operate in a normal economy. So a lot of us aren't in our normal workplaces, aren't in our doing our normal things. So this provides us an extra opportunity to have our discussions in a different format. So I'm going to open us up in prayer, and then I'm going to make a few comments, and then we'll turn it over to probably what you're all looking for today, our chat with Delegate Bob Marshall. So let's open this up in prayer. Lord God, we're grateful for who you are and for the fact that we can trust you. As you have been sovereign in the history of this nation and in our Commonwealth, we know you are still on your throne. And Lord, despite difficulties with this pandemic, Lord, we know that we can rely on you. Lord, we pray that you'd give our governing officials wisdom, in particular the governor as he controls this economy. Lord, we just pray that you would help him to understand the balance between the health and the economy and know how to navigate that best for Virginia families. Lord, we pray for families who are struggling either economically or with their health. God, we pray that you would just sustain them during this season. And we just thank you for just the way that you meet each and every need that we have in these moments. We pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, so a few quick updates from the Family Foundation. If you weren't with us last night, Family Foundation Action had a fantastic candidate forum virtually in our 7th district. So we're watching that race very tightly. As you know, this is the year all of our congressmen and women are up for election. And so at the Family Foundation Action, our sister organization, we have set out a path to take back the 7th. We believe that's a winnable congressional district. Delegate Bratt only lost that district to, Congressman Bratt only lost that district to Congresswoman Spanberger by about 7,000 votes, a little bit less. So we really think now's the time to take that back, and we've been working hard towards that. So last night we had Delegate McGuire and Delegate Freitas and Tina Ramirez and Andrews, all these candidates. There's like 6 or 7 of them, to kind of go through a Q&A. So if you didn't join us, that was a great opportunity. We'll continue to provide those things for folks whenever possible. Other things we're keeping an eye on at this moment, as you know, we had veto session. We've been talking about that a lot on this live chat, VIP chat situation, because we were gearing up hoping that the General Assembly and the governor were going to make some decisions that would reduce some of the spending, knowing that our economy is certainly not in the place that it has been given this pandemic. So what we did see was there were some items stripped from the budget. $20 million for local police and sheriffs, raises for teachers. They cut millions from cash assistance to low-income families. All sorts of things were slashed, which unfortunately kind of have to be. But what's alarming is what they didn't touch, what they left in the budget. And of course, as you would guess, typical of the current leadership, it is all the social propaganda that is being brought by their base. So they left in place 15 new positions created in the Attorney General's office, specifically to address the new laws that go into place on sexual orientation, gender identity, non-discrimination. Lots of words. What that means is we now have a new law that's going to create a direct attack on our schools, churches, and other ministries that have traditional marriage tenets of faith, because no longer will they be able to hire and fire according to their faith. No longer will their public accommodations be safe to be at use in the way that they want to use them. And so we're expecting a lot of litigation, and the AG's office is expecting to be the main, we'll just say, we expect them to start coming after entities that they don't think align with their orthodoxy. And so they've created 15 new positions. They left that in the budget. They also left the $3 million for LARC grant spending that basically goes to Planned Parenthood. Long detailed issue if you're not in the loop on that, on what LARCs are and all that. But the bottom line is, ultimately, it's a nice gift to Planned Parenthood. They kept that gift in the budget. Oh, and they also kept in the money to fund the DMV's new implementation of the new non-binary status that you can put on your driver's license. So we're not giving raises, but we're making sure that if you're neither a male or a female, you can get that on your driver's license. We obviously have a relationship with James Shoup, the first person that ever got a non-binary notation on his DMV driver's license out in Oregon, and he'll tell you it's all a farce. He has circled completely back to his God-given biological male nature, and he'll tell you that this idea of putting something other than male and female on a driver's license is ridiculous, but that remains in the budget. So just a little update on what the General Assembly and the governor did with their time at veto session. We obviously were hoping for a little more focus on the things that matter, a little less focus on special interest groups, but we knew not to count on that from this particular government. So that's the quick summation of veto session. You can get more on our blog, in our email alerts. If you're not getting those, go to our website at familyfoundation.org and sign up, because that's always your best way to stay in the loop. And on that website at the bottom is all the blogs, so you can kind of catch yourself up if you're for any reason out of date on what's headed here. Want to announce next week's forum speaker before we get to this one. Next week's VIP speaker is going to be a special guest of ours from Save the State, and his name is Michael Maybach. We're thrilled to have him. He's been a longtime partner and friend of the Family Foundation. But his focus for us next week is going to be on something that is truly threatening to everything that we believe in, and that is this issue of the Electoral College getting undone. So the liberals want to undo the Electoral College as the method of us electing our representatives. And essentially what that means is you make a compact called the National Compact, and basically California and New York get to pick our next president if they are successful, and continue to have an outweighed opinion on who our representatives are. It's very alarming. Our founders set up a very specific system to ensure that smaller states that fly over states aren't overlooked by large populous areas when we go to vote, that it's not just simply urban centers that elect who we have as president and so forth. So he's going to get into the details of where we are with that. I'm really looking forward to that. It is a huge threat. It was in the General Assembly this year. Thankfully, it was stopped for this year by the skin of our teeth. So we are all going to get up to speed on this before we get back to January, so that everybody is knowledgeable and can speak with their friends and neighbors about this. The last announcement I'll make before we get to our main speaker today is that I want you to hold the date for June 1st in the afternoon. We're going to be doing a very special, longer simulcast than we're doing here, with greater detail and some really exciting speakers. I'm not going to announce those yet, but some really exciting speakers. And our theme is going to be talking about redeeming the crisis, how this pandemic actually points us to conservative principles, how even in these hard moments, and especially in these hard moments, we actually see that the principles that you and I believe in are the principles that carry this Commonwealth through a pandemic, and why the closer we get to aligning ourselves with a culture of life, with capitalism done correctly, with an education system that is able to think outside the box, the better we're going to do when these crisis moments hit. And we've got some awesome speakers, so I just want you to reserve that date before we go forward so that you don't miss that. I'll get you more details as we release them. And so at this point, I'm really excited to turn it over to Todd Gackey, our Director of Legislative Affairs, and Delegate Bob Marshall. Many of you followed the career of Delegate Bob Marshall throughout his time at the General Assembly. We were thrilled to have such an advocate, such a fighter for our issues. And, you know, people may agree or disagree with Delegate Marshall on everything that he does. You know, the liberals obviously don't agree with him, but almost everybody knows he's the smartest guy in the room. And almost everybody knows that he absolutely knew parliamentary rules and how to navigate the system towards your ends better than anybody in the General Assembly. Many of us watched this year's legislative session, And we saw just an absolute abuse of the process and the rules by the new, particularly in the House of Delegates, by the new majority. We saw a speaker who made rulings that weren't correct, that routinely did things that were outside the bounds. And we were wishing that Delegate Marshall was still there to call her out. There's a famous video from like 2 decades ago where you see Delegate Marshall at his finest challenging procedure, let's put it that way. But anyway, we're glad to at least have you here. We know you have a unique perspective, having been in the legislature for such a long time, and still engaging this year in a different way on the outside, feeding into op-eds and just being part of the brain trust of the conservative movement even still. So I'm going to turn it over at this point and let you all continue with your conversation.
Great. Well, Delegate Marshall, it is a real pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for agreeing to join us today. And we are really looking forward to your insight. And Victoria really set up this conversation. But before we get into the policy, just want to check in to see how you and your family are doing in the midst of this crisis and mandatory stay-at-home policy.
Well, my daughter and, of course, my wife live with us, and our grandson, we're helping him with homeschool. He goes to a little Catholic school, but they had previously set this up, unlike Fairfax County Public Schools, who were unable to follow through with the education of the students. So I'm helping Grayson. We homeschooled all of our kids before, so this is nothing new, and it's just kind of like a refresher course. And my wife and daughter are both working here from home remotely. They work for a general contractor who works just all around the place, employs about 225 people. So they're active, they're not restrained, and they're still doing what they should do to keep the money coming into the home here.
Yeah. Well, I know that y'all are engaged there and doing what many families are doing these days, which is learning how to juggle employment and teaching kids and helping with their instruction. A lot happened this session. We're going to kind of go through a bunch of issues, I think, today, but I think Victoria set it up really nice. And let me just throw this out to you, this general question of what are your thoughts about session this year with the new majority at the helm?
Well, it just shows you that the other side was serious about social issues when for years, and I was there for 26 years, the Republicans largely wanted to duck the social issues. Not that they disagreed with them, they didn't want to get in fights on that. Now, whether they thought the public was not behind them or they couldn't mobilize public opinion, I'm not going to take a point on that. But the direct fact is that the other side had no inhibitions at all about expanding legal access to pot, to gambling, to claiming that a psychologist who tries to dissuade a student from pursuing certain sexual behaviors will lose his or her license. But if you go to persuade them to indulge in those behaviors, you're fine. So this is not equal treatment. And again, there's a book here which I was just reading about so-called homosexual marriage, and there's a reference in there, I think, from Congressman Barney Frank back in 1997 when the Defense of Marriage Act passed, and Bill Clinton signed it literally in the middle of the night. And he was saying, well, how does my marriage to somebody in Hawaii affect you? It has absolutely nothing to do with it. Well, try telling that to all the Virginians who are going to have their public schools or their private schools attacked for simply upholding the correct understanding of marriage, which is a union between a man and a woman for life. That makes you a bigot. So I guess Mother Teresa, Pope John Paul II, Jesus, who had this narrow myopic view that marriage was only a relationship between a man and a woman, are on their list of bigots. So we have got to get our people out. And in fact, we're going to have to use the election law changes, which even includes now registration on the day of election, which there's absolutely no way to check, to do a paper trail if somebody is a bona fide registrant. I could give a street and an address that doesn't exist, and no one at the election polling booth is going to have a way to say, hey, 1234 Pottsville Street doesn't exist. It's not going to happen. I'll go in and vote at that precinct. I can go to another precinct, and there's no way to check it. So this is ripe for fraud, which means our people have to double their efforts, get everybody registered by mail. And if you're worried about, voting in presidents because of the coronavirus, you now have the ability to vote by mail. So do not let the other side monopolize this. And I know we can lament some of these changes, but we have to deal with these changes.
Yeah. You've seen a lot as a member of the House of Delegates. In your opinion, when we look back 5 or 10 years from now, what kind of impact do you think this 2020 session will have had on Virginia?
The looking back is going to depend upon what people marked with the sign of faith do between now and November of this year, and after that for the 2021 General Assembly session. So I can't make any predictions because I don't know what our side is going to do. In 1918, when you had the Spanish flu epidemic, the Republicans switched control in the Congress. Now, that was the result of some lower voter turnouts, I guess, on the part of Democrats, and you still had Woodrow Wilson as president, but that changed things, and that was in the midst of a very serious pandemic. So this is like, rolling the dice, and I'm not in the prophecy business, or at least not in the accurate necessarily prophecy business. I can lay out what has happened, say some prayers, and do the best I can to make sure that what we need to have happen, at least block things from getting worse, we must do, or we're going to answer someday to our Lord and say, well, I gave you all these options. What did you do with them?
Yeah, that's great. That's great insight there. As you know, the left came in with a very full agenda. They spent tons of money during the elections. Emily's List poured in lots of money. But the number one issue on their agenda, it was the very first bill that was introduced during the pre-filing this year, was the so-called Equal Rights Amendment. Can you help us understand why this is so important? This one issue was so important to the left.
Well, there's a TV program on Hulu, one of these production companies. It's about the Equal Rights Amendment. And while they are missing the real personality of Phyllis Schlafly and her deep religious faith, her determination, and her sense of humor, which was ever present. I knew Phyllis when my wife and I were working for Bob Dornan back in 1978. Phyllis came in the office, and Bob Dornan was a member of Congress from Southern California. B1 Bob was his nickname. He was a radio and TV announcer. He was just a genius with media. And we met Phyllis, and that's when I first was taking seriously the Equal Rights Amendment. I'd watched it before, but she nailed down what it's going to do. And in 1970, the reason I'm mentioning 1978, the amendment was introduced. Well, it actually was introduced in the 1920s after the voting was secured for women in all the states. There were about 15 states in 1917 and 18 which allowed women to vote, but not all the states did. So the suffragettes secured the right to vote, and a lot of the people thought, well, that in itself will secure whatever rights are necessary. But 2 or 3 years after that, there was an effort to have a separate so-called Equal Rights Amendment for women. This split the women's movement at that point, and it stayed split until 1972, because there were differences between the people who said, well, I'm for equal rights, but you can't make equal things which are inherently different, such as male and female. Unless you don't have any sense at all, you've got to understand there were different functions, individual and social, that apply to men and women. And the fight even then was whether or not an exception should be made for the obvious differences between men and women, to not treat people identically, but equally. So you had this time from 1923 to 1972 when some of the bills would pass from the Senate onto the floor, but none passed both houses. When they were being considered in the 40s and 50s, Senator Carl Hayden of Arizona would put an amendment qualifying the application of this, so that allowed states and Congress to take into account the substantive differences between men and women that you and I would recognize, and Phyllis certainly did. And that always, quote, that killed it for the real shrieking feminists. Now, with this series that's going on Hulu, and I think there's 4 or 5 episodes so far, I mean, if you got good acting, I mean, it's the ideology is correct. Like I say, they're missing things about Phyllis, but who was for this is being portrayed, and I think it's a plus for the public to see. It was the abortionist, and it was the homosexual rights people who longed for the Equal Rights Amendment. And this is what Phyllis pointed out, and she also pointed out the draft, the consequences of the Equal Rights Amendment. And in fact, when there were attempts to amend the Equal Rights Amendment from 1970 through 72, and this is when it actually got to the floor and got, serious for the sense of passing. It first passed the House on what's called a discharge petition in 1970 by 300 and some to 30. It was about an hour's debate, and that was it. When it got to the Senate, Senator Ervin of North Carolina, formerly a judge, started raising some of the questions that were going to be there. He said, well, do you really want women to be drafted? People said, this has nothing to do with drafting. It had everything to do with drafting, because Senator Bayh received a letter from the general counsel for the Defense Department say, well, it's not our position to recommend or not, but we don't see how, if you have the draft, and remember the Vietnam War was in the background here, that you can mandate the drafting of men into combat, but you can exempt the drafting of women. You couldn't do that. And this, again, it was chatter in the background. Ervin mentioned, how can you have criminal prosecutions for certain sexual offenses? Again, this went over the heads of some of these people. And he also asked the question, how can you prohibit, quote, marriage between a man and a man? Well, these questions were avoided and not really addressed. When it passed, and it passed the House in 70, they had elections in November of 1970. They came back, it started again, passed the House again, went to the Senate and passed there on March 22nd. It was conditioned with a 7-year ratification time limit. And that ratification time limit, according to the chief sponsor in the House of Representatives, Congresswoman Martha Griffith, was necessary to secure the votes to get a 2/3 majority in the Senate. So the claim that, this was not needed or not added, it was added at the request of the patron of the bill, because she recognized it wouldn't get anywhere if it didn't pass. She thought it was going to be as fast as the 18-year-old vote, again, which happened during the Vietnam War. It didn't happen. Why? Because within a year, Phyllis Schlafly, and this movie brings it out, stopped the ERA in its tracks. The most they got was 30 states. And this was, remember, they had 7 years to do it. No constitutional amendment ever proposed by Congress at that time had taken longer than 4 years and 3 months or whatever to be ratified. There was some constitutional amendments that were hanging out there, which didn't have any time limit, which was part of the Bill of Rights that was passed in 1789, but they were never ratified. You even have an amendment authorizing the continuation of slavery, which is still out there right now, never was ratified. So the pro-ERA people started to realize this in 1977, that they weren't going to win. And they weren't going to win because of Phyllis Schlafly's organizing. They then approached Congress to do something that had never been done before and has not been done since then, even with the attempt to secure voting rights for the District of Columbia. They sought to amend the 7-year time limit, which they argued for. You had Eleanor Smeal present a paper with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Harvard, attorneys of significant clout, saying it is constitutional to add an amendment to 2 things. It's constitutional to put a limit on it, and that had been decided in a case in 1919 or 21 with the Prohibition Amendment, and also that you can extend the amendment. Well, this is like saying, I bought a ticket for the Yankees, World Series in 1956, but I want to use it now in 2021. Well, you can't do it. The game's over. You have to start over. At that time, they were saying, well, you could do it. come up to, now the last 3 years when you had Illinois, Nevada, and Virginia allegedly approve these constitutional amendments, because they had, like I say, they ultimately reached 35 states. 5 states rescinded. They should have gone back to 30, even if you were saying this is still open. They didn't do that. So these 3 states purportedly ratified the amendment. They can't ratify something that's not pending. It's like shaking hands with a ghost. It's not going to work. But the question came up is, are these ratifications still valid? Can a state rescind was one of the questions. Robert Jackson was the Solicitor General in 1938 when the case came up of Coleman versus Miller, when a question came up about the ratification by the state of Kansas of the then pending child labor amendment. In the early 1920s, you had an effort by the constitutional amendment to prevent child labor. So that was still out there. It was passed in like 1924. It was still pending, a number of years later in the 1930s. A challenge came over a ratification in Kansas, which happened with the lieutenant governor casting a vote. And that was a separate question of whether or not he actually was a member of the legislature. The Solicitor General, Robert Jackson, and a professor from Harvard, I think not Roscoe Pound, anyway, he was an assistant attorney general. He argued against the ERA later. They said states may rescind ratifications, and state may rescind ratifications until 2 things happen. Either you have 3/4 or a decision of the Supreme Court comes down and says that ratifications are not rescindable. Now, who was Robert Jackson? Robert Jackson was then the Solicitor General. He was later, that was under Roosevelt. He was Attorney General under Roosevelt. Roosevelt appointed him to the Supreme Court. He was an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. He was the Chief Prosecutor for the United States at the Nuremberg trials. That is quite a legal pedigree. And you had Jackson, who was no conservative really, say the states can rescind. Well, now you have Eleanor Smeal, to back up again, who first said Congress can change the time. She then argued in about 3 years ago, Congress has no authority to change the time. So even though she had Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Lawrence Tribe saying you could change the time, she yanked the chair from under them and says you can't change the time. This is good for ratification until the second coming or 3 years after that. What happens is the Equal Rights Amendment approached this, and Philip Curlin of the University of Chicago Law School mentioned this, with a Janus face attitude. What's the Janus face? It's that movie. If you go to a movie theater, you don't go now anymore, but you see 2 faces, one with a smile and one with a sad face. They presented the smiling face to the public, but the sad face was always over here. So even though you could get polls, as was done in Virginia, to claim that 80% of Virginians support the Equal Rights Amendment, you don't get 80% of the people supporting what the Equal Rights Amendment does. For example, you don't get 80% of the people saying, oh yes, I think girls should compete against boys. You don't get anywhere near that. It's a minority. When you interview women in the military, do you want to go into frontline ground combat? It's like 10%. They don't want to do that. Do you want to have gay marriage? No, they don't. Do you want to have abortion? All these things are minority positions in the United States. But when you can avoid the discussion of them and only argue about equal treatment, you can get what looks like a majority. It's not a majority at all. It's a soft question with a very spongy answer. That's why they want to do this, because you never have to directly argue these questions. As a matter of fact, Gerald Nadler, in the summer of 2018, he's now chairman of the Judiciary Committee. He was with a group up there of the women who were pushing for this, who had reintroduced current different versions of the ERA. And he said, look, this was when Kavanaugh was up for nomination. He said, we are worried that what the Supreme Court giveth, the Supreme Court taketh away, meaning even Lawrence Tribe and advocates for abortion recognized there was no constitutional right to abortion. You had the dean of the Stanford Law School who agreed with this, but he said, you can't find this in the Constitution. And it bothered him that the abortion advocates were so cavalier, and even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it bothered her that the distinction was made in Roe versus Wade the way it was. She wanted a firmer foundation. So you got Ginsburg, you had everybody who's anybody behind this, realizing that Roe is a very weak prop. And all of a sudden they saw Trump. Who did he nominate? Judge Gorsuch, Judge Kavanaugh. All these people look like they're going to at least reverse Roe, which won't reinstate the right to life laws in the states unless the state never rescinded. If a state rescinded that law and the Supreme Court says you can outlaw abortion, the state has to pass it again. In states that did not take the abortion law off their books, they will automatically start enforcing the abortion law again, which is why it's very dangerous. Next year, there's going to be an effort to attempt to repeal the constitutional marriage amendment, of which I was the chief sponsor in the House, and Senator Newman was the chief sponsor in the Senate. You don't do that. It's there. It's not, technically, it's not enforceable now. It's still good law, because to go back to that child labor case, the question came up in, I think, in 1936 when Roosevelt was president. Homer Cummings was the attorney general, and Roosevelt asked him, say, look, the District of Columbia had a law on the books prohibiting child labor. Do they have to reenact this? He said, no. All the Supreme Court can do, they can't undo a law. They can suspend enforcement. Only the legislature can pass a law. And you've got to understand this. So when this fight comes up next year, they say it doesn't matter. I'm sorry, it matters very much whether or not this legislature, there were some Republicans toying around with this, I saw, will pull this, throw it back on the referendum question for rescinding. Do not do that. Wrong tactic from a practical standpoint and a theoretical standpoint.
Yeah, and we'll be there opposing that effort, and we will be certainly coming to you for some guidance on that issue. That's a great point. I had some questions in here, but you've been able to nail pretty much every single one that I've had. You've really addressed the moot issue. You've touched on what the consequences would be if hypothetically the ERA were to be ratified. Can you just explain, where are we going now? Where does the ERA stand now, and what should we all expect going forward?
Well, this is interesting. I guess it was about a little more than a year ago. I wrote a letter to the Attorney General Barr, and I said, look, what I did, I recounted for him what's going on in Virginia during 2018. I said, there's an effort to do this, to so purportedly ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. If this passes Virginia, it will be claimed that this is now the 38th state, which would make it 3/4 of all the states that you need to ostensibly ratify this pending amendment. I said, can you issue another opinion on the question of the extension? In 1977, Jimmy Carter's Justice Department, the chief counsel over there, I can't think of his name right now, he wrote an opinion for the House Judiciary Committee chaired by Chairman Rodino. I used to work up there, so I can remember some of these names. He was from New Jersey. And Bella Abzug was up there when I worked for a Democrat, John Blotnick. This was so funny. And she's in this movie, and rightly so, because she was pushing the ERA. Blotnick was a social conservative, but a New Deal liberal. He was a World War II guy in the OSS, jumped out of airplanes in Yugoslavia. I worked for him. He was chairman of the Committee on Public Works. When Bella Abzug, a screaming liberal if there ever was, got elected, he ordered a huge bouquet of flowers. Now, feminists don't like to be treated like, quote, traditional women. Didn't matter to Blotnick. He went over there, and he's chairman of the committee, gave her the flowers, and he said it kind of took the edge off some of her statements. So I thought to myself, you're pretty smart to do this, to do exactly what the feminists say you should not be doing, because the quote, the woman in Abzug came out appreciation of these beautiful flowers. So, but anyway, you had the amendment up for extension for, it was like 3 years and 3 months and so many days. Like I say, Kathy and I were working for Bob Dornan, and the joke when some of these things were going around was that the extension was precisely for the same amount of time that Antichrist was supposed to rule in Jerusalem. We actually did a dear colleague and sent it around the hill like that. I mean, it was a joke, but Bob Dornan didn't mind it. Anyway, they did get this 39-month and a few days extension. But what that did is, to get that, the Justice Department had to argue that you could change the time limit. But in the arguing of changing the time limit, the Attorney General, for the Office of Legal Counsel, said to effectuate the extension, you would have to pass the extension before the deadline of March 22nd, 1979. Otherwise, it's dead. So I thought to myself, wait a minute, March 22nd, 1979, they did pass it before that. It was like October or November 78, and it went on for 3 years and so on, but then it fell. These are the same people who said, well, it didn't matter that it was cut off. We're saying it's still good. Everybody up there, Shirley Chisholm, and again, if you watch the Hulu series, you're going to see her in there. I have her on from the congressional hearing, and she was being asked a question by Congressman Harold Volcker, who supported the ERA, but he was sketchy about whether you could extend it or extend it after a time limit. He asked Chisholm, he was on the Judiciary Committee, if we don't extend the ERA until after the deadline, what then? She said, well, it's dead. You can't do that. Eleanor Smeal basically said, no, we need to extend it before the deadline because it falls. We'll have to reintroduce the amendment again. You had any number of even Lawrence Tribe, I think at the Senate hearing on this, acknowledged you have to pass this before the deadline comes to pass. If you don't do it, you've missed your chance. It's like saying, I want to go back and play the ninth inning of the game 2 years after the game's over. You can't do it. It's gone. You had your chance. You missed it. So what I wrote the letter and I said, please revisit this and address this question of the extension, because he wouldn't have to change Barr wouldn't have to change an opinion on that. He just would have to say basically, well, we argued before that you couldn't do it until if you did it after the date, and that's still the position. He even went further than that, and he said the extension was improperly authorized at that point. So the case, now why do I bring that up? There is a case sitting in the District of Columbia, federal district, and that district goes straight up to the Supreme Court. There's no other, intervening actions. Mark Herring has filed a case seeking to compel the clerk of the House, the head of the archives, to certify that the amendment is passed. Federal law states that the clerk of the state legislature that passes a resolution purportedly authorizing or saying that the legislature has approved this, sends it to the archivist, the chief archivist. And prior to that, he basically had been saying that he was going to go ahead and certify this. Well, that stopped because somebody at the Justice Department from Office of Legal Counsel had to talk to the archivist, and he said, I will not proceed without benefit of direction from the Justice Department. So because he has not certified that the Equal Rights Amendment is purportedly ratified, Herring has gone in, and he had about 15 states agreeing with him, and he's the chief lead on this because Virginia was the last state, so it's proper, even though he's doing this for whatever known reason. He's claiming that there should be a court order directing the archivist to certify that the amendment has been approved. So that's where that stands right now. And there's a bill that went in, who's the lady from New York who put in a resolution stripping the time limit off, because they still haven't stripped the time limit off either. That, I think, passed the House, and it's sitting over in the Senate, and it's not going to get anywhere, which is why you need to make sure you have a Republican Senate after November 2020. Because if you don't have a Republican Senate after 2020, you're going to have people that are going to play fast and loose with the wording here and say, oh, we think that this was ratified. And you won't have a Bill Barr with the, am I still on or did I?
Yeah, you are. Keep going. You're doing good.
Okay. All right. You won't have a Bill Barr as Attorney General to argue that case. You're going to have God knows what, doing that. So these elections are extremely important. And if you think that the Constitution protects us, remember, the Constitution is always interpreted by the court. The Supreme Court since 1789 has reversed itself, according to a compilation by the Library of Congress, about 234 times, which means whereas they first said that a certain state law or federal law was constitutional, they later said it's unconstitutional. Or where they first said it's unconstitutional, they later said it's constitutional. So to think the judges are going to protect you, remember, the politicians appoint the judges. In Virginia, it's very clear there's no election of judges, they're directly appointed. So the state judges are picked by the state legislature. The House and Senate has to agree. In Congress, the Senate must give advice and consent, and they must approve on a majority vote a nominee to the Supreme Court. This is extremely dangerous. Remember, Senator Schumer, a couple of months ago, issuing this crazy threat to Justice Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh. We're watching you. And they were watching them when the abortion people were arguing up there. Maybe it was because of the ERA, that we need to protect this right. Well, hold on. If abortion is in the Constitution, you don't need to threaten justices. If it's not the Constitution, Schumer has to worry. But the fact that he issued a threat, and these are not my words, Chief Justice John Roberts said you shouldn't be threatening justices. Senator Grassley, who's the president pro tem of the Senate, that means he's been there the longest time, and then the majority leader, he said, all three of them said, you're threatening a public official. Now, that's a pretty good witness list to come up with that conclusion. And there was a group in Virginia called Gun Owners of America. They called to the attention of the governor of New York, say, look, you all passed a law, said if you issue a threat, you may not own or possess a gun. They took these statements that were there from against Kavanaugh and Gorsuch by Chuck Schumer and said, hey, New York, enforce your law. You even if Schumer doesn't own a gun right now, he should be put on a list that says you can't own a gun because he issued a threat. But you see, Cuomo didn't do it because there surely is a double-tiered sense of justice, one for conservatives, one for liberals, which means our people must be active. We have got to register more people than we ever have before. We're going to have to do it under the current liabilities of social distancing. But hey, since you can register by mail or on the internet now, we need to do it. If you're at home spending time there, send an email out with the address of the voter registrar for Virginia, for the state of Virginia. Get everybody in your church registered. Please do that and follow this up. If you don't do it, we're going to be swamped even more because the other side wants to make their revolution permanent, which is why they changed the voter laws that they did.
Wow, I tell you, we're getting kind of close to the clock here, up to the end of time, but I want to still ask you one more question. We've kind of gone through all the things that that I had to ask you about, but we've been able to go over a variety of topics: the ERA, the importance of traditional marriage, the importance of elections and the consequences that they can have. So I want to ask you maybe some questions that some of the participants have asked. And one of them, and this is one that we get and we receive for the past 3 weeks that we've conducted these chats, and that deals with Senate Bill 868, which is the whole non-discrimination legislation that was passed that really threatens churches, private religious schools. It's going to delve into areas like public accommodation, employment. I wanted to get your thoughts on this legislation and the greater impact that it's going to have in Virginia.
Well, this 868 is very similar to a statute that was passed in Congress called the Equality Act in its effects. And if you ever have a chance, go to LifeSite News, and I wrote an article for them about the effects of the Equality Acts. If Christians don't personally engage in politics. It's all over for America. I did it from a kind of a Catholic standpoint of what, Catholic bishops could do or not do, but I did put the analysis in there. So after this program, if you want to see a more in-depth analysis, go read that article. But what it does, it seeks to make us complicit with, supportive of, and materially cooperate with the behavior that has been found to be not consistent with Christian morals. And it's not even consistent with good health. And you need to go to PubMed, which is the research engine for the National Library of Medicine, and type in homosexual sexual behavior, and you'll look up some of these things. And it's the behavior that they want to be approved of. Because if you have any standard in law outside of that, which even lets Christians not participate, it means that their behavior is not accepted as a universal good, because there are these holdouts from these Christians who say this behavior is sinful. And there was an article in the New York Times, an op-ed piece, where this guy was writing homosexual advocates saying Christians, about 3 years ago, I put it in my book called Reclaiming the Republic, where Christians have to take homosexuality off the sin list. Well, I don't know that you can have an amendment of the 10 Commandments. At least I'm not aware that you can. And that is not up to church officials. How you respond to it is. But they want to make us complicit. Why? This is going to be like a Thomas More moment for Christians all over the country, not just Catholics, because you want the effort here is to make you comply with, support, and endorse, and be part of the effecting of this behavior. So if you don't want two guys or somebody who thinks they're in a same-sex marriage to be an example in a Christian school, you're going to have to fight this tooth and nail, and you're going to have to register more people to vote. And you can't possibly vote for any of the people who voted for this year, or your school will be shut. This is the alternative. Your school will be shut down, or you will have example that is very problematic for morals. Remember what Christ says: if you harm one of these little ones, it's better that a chain was around your neck and cast into the ocean. Not that you do that literally, but you don't give bad example to children. That's precisely what the purpose of this law is, to remove the Christian warp and woof of society totally from the social fabric. Remember that you're the salt of the earth. What does salt do? It preserves food. You are the light of the world. If your light goes out, the world's in darkness and is stumbling. So the effort here is to undo us as the light of the world with the gift of faith, and undo us as the salt of society to preserve it. Preserve it from what? Destruction, self-destruction. You must do this, or your children will be compressed into this bad choice situation. Bad choice on one side, bad choice on another side. So while it may be annoying and say, I really don't want to get involved in politics, your choice is to do that, or to see your kids be pulled into a vortex that is going to be very difficult to get out, because the options for acting are being compressed more and more each day. And what was passed this year is basically to kick us out of any position of social influence. So if the church loses these lawsuits because they don't want to hire people and present two guys who are married or two women think they're married as an example to kids, they're going to be fined $50,000 a day. Now, you better have some good, smart attorneys to do this, to protect yourself. Mm-hmm. Maybe the church is, the fallback position is to emphasize or have widespread homeschooling. I mean, that's one of the things there, but this has got to be thought about. I don't want to think about it right now. We need to think about it and come up with some solid tactics that can be employed. But you really don't have a choice, because the other side is taking the choices away from you. So you either fight to survive with your faith, or you don't fight and you lose your faith and you lose your children. Not very appealing.
Yeah. Last question, and just a couple of minutes. this kind of goes along with what you just mentioned, that we have to be engaged in politics. We have to be engaged in the policy process. For those who are maybe not as engaged as others, what speaks loudest to delegates and senators, especially on issues like these?
Well, I'm sorry, say that again.
Yeah, for those that are not engaged in politics or the public policy process, what speaks the loudest to delegates and senators when they're talking to their offices?
You don't have to threaten people with saying I'm not going to vote for you, but if a delegate or senator understands that their actions are very problematic, you need to tell them that's the case, and that you need to have people uphold the natural law. Look, the laws of nature and nature's God was the standard to which our founders of the United States appealed to when fighting Great Britain. They didn't say the opinions of Horatio Alger or whatever. They said the laws of nature and nature's God. We have to get back to understanding and reaffirming that there are laws of nature, that certain actions are inherently evil, and whether somebody's off balance mentally, I'm not talking about their accountability. I'm talking about the objective assessment of the behavior. You've got to get back to that, or elsewise we've lost it all. I mean, now, how do you get to the point where people in public office can think that men can become women? I mean, doesn't make any sense to me. You don't change your genetic code. Certainly people who are men who think they're women will never contract ovarian cancer. Why? They don't have ovaries. Simple. So we've got to get back to something that's very basic, but that means we have to be active. Remember the Great Commission that Christ gave the apostles. He didn't say, I'm telling you this, now go and sleep on it. He said, I'm telling you about the truth of the natural law, about what I've done to defeat Satan, and about the path to heaven that you need to share with others. Go teach all nations, even to the ends of the world. That means your neighbor. That means writing letters to the editor, especially now that you're going to be very rough to go door to door. I wouldn't go door to door right now because people would think, this person, maybe, giving me the coronavirus. So that means all the social media outlets that you have, including writing letters to the paper, the real hard copy papers, and the blogs, you have got to do this more so than you ever did before if you're going to preserve your faith.
Yeah. Wow, this has been a terrific chat. I've just soaked in so much information. It's amazing you were able to give this much information in just a short amount of time. And I think that you've painted a very sobering picture, one that we really need to be engaged in the political process. We need to get out the vote and make a difference in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we're just so thankful that you've been part of this chat. We appreciate your time. We'll be praying for you. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Victoria, who will close us out.
Let me just mention one thing. There's
Sure.
always hope. Do not despair. Despair is a sin.
Love it. On that note, thank you so much, Delegate Marshall. We appreciate your time. And I knew people were in for a treat because I knew how much you knew about the Equal Rights Amendment, but I didn't know if everybody knew what an expert you were and how much you were involved in the original battles, the earlier on battles that really do shape where we are legally today. So that's absolutely just a treat for a lot of folks to kind of get that kind of background. Family Foundation has been involved both on the advocacy side and in the background, very background of some of the litigation that's going on with the states. On the opposite side of our Commonwealth, as Delegate Marshall mentioned, our Attorney General is taking the wrong approach. Family Foundation's jumping in with states that are taking the right approach. So it's been, an ongoing battle to keep this thing as dead as it absolutely already is. So anyway, we're just it's been great to kind of rehash that with you, and thank you for building the motivation for us to get engaged. I actually spent some of the morning really focused on Family Foundation and our grassroots efforts. We have a lot of exciting things coming around the corner for folks on how they can engage and how they can connect better to people in their locality to engage more effectively when they come together. So I can't wait till we're at the point where we can kind of outline those for you. And I will tell you, as Delegate Marshall mentioned, just the battle that we're going to have in our churches and our schools as we combat these new non-discrimination laws, because we have no choice. We are excited about some turn of events at the Family Foundation on that front, and excited to be getting close to really unleashing a whole new sort of legal capacity with our organization. So there's a lot that we are ramping up because the battle is ramping up. And so as the battle ramps up, each of us need to ask ourselves, what's the one more thing we can do? What's the one extra? If I'm already voting, then what's my next step? Well, holding my legislator accountable. If I'm holding my legislator accountable, what's the next step? Well, talking to my neighbor and making sure they're voting and making sure they're registered. And so there's a whole chain of activities, and all of us fall somewhere on that spectrum of our level of engagement. But as the other side has continuously increased its engagement, we have to counter that. And so appreciate this conversation. Yes, it is stark. It can be a little bit maybe overwhelming when you think about the idea of someone coming in and litigating against your church, trying to charge you with, $50,000, $100,000 fine simply for trying to hire according to the tenets of your faith. But that's where we feel confident that the framework our founders set in place for the First Amendment, and with an understanding that we're supposed to be exercising our religion, that we are supposed to be able to work out our faith, certainly in our own private associations, and the way that we come together to do business and to do social justice work out in our communities. Those are things that we know that we should have absolute constitutional authority to be able to continue to do in the way that our faith dictates. And so unfortunately, we're just going to have to prove that a little bit, we expect, in the next season in our courts. We're thankful, at least we've been getting more and more conservative judges appointed, thanks to the Trump administration being really faithful to fill those vacancies. And so obviously that's a key to the entire conservative movement, is making sure you don't have activists sitting on the bench that reinterpret the things that we know are important. So with that, I'm going to just remind you, a couple announcements I made at the beginning. Next week, you don't want to miss this. That level of knowledge you just got from Delegate Marshall on the ERA is similar to the level of knowledge that you're going to get with our friend Michael Maybach to the Save the States, with the Save the States organization, really helping us understand why, if we go to a dismantling of the Electoral College, why we can kind of kiss the future of all of these issues away, because we no longer have any ability to impact elections. It is deeply disturbing if you're in Virginia and not a New York or California. Certainly imagine if you're in rural parts where you elect good conservative officials and you vote for conservatives for president, and it doesn't matter what your voice says, because we're going to just essentially go to the urban centers. And so this is a true threat. This used to be like the ERA. Delegate Marshall can relate to this. We had years and years where the ERA would pop up in committee and we could whack it down in like a one sentence. We're not even going to bother with this discussion because it's invalid. The Electoral College debate is much like that, where there was a time where this was, there were people who wanted to do this, but in Virginia, this was a non-entertained discussion. This was something where everybody knew this was harmful. This is not what our founders intended. But unfortunately, it's a new day. And just like the General Assembly attempts to move this ERA thing forward, despite it being dead, this Electoral College issue is significant, and it is moving forward. And so that's why we wanted to bring this to you next week. So join us again next week. Last thing, don't forget, June 1st in the afternoon, put that on your calendar. I will give you more details as we have them. But for today, I think this is all we have. Thank you so much for being a part of our webcast here. And if you have anything that you don't know enough about, try the Family Foundation website or reach out to us, familyfoundation.org. Thanks so much. Have a great day.